The lovable loser is an incredibly common character trope used in television, books, and other media in which a sympathetic, likable, or well-meaning person continually has bad luck that prevents them in their various efforts to succeed. Chances are your favorite book, TV show, or maybe even movie has one of these characters. Well, in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, we have them as well. Usually the definition doesn't perfectly translate, as most of Yu-Gi-Oh's lovable losers are highly beloved archetypes that have seen some, but not a great amount of competitive success, and the reason for their failures isn't directly tied to bad luck. Some examples in my opinion would be Skull Servants and Fluffles. But what if there was once a theme that bad luck just seemed to follow? An archetype that, while never world-class level, actually came dangerously close multiple times to winning a prestigious championship. Many in the Yu-Gi-Oh community know nothing about this theme beyond the memes, but in this video, I'll teach you about its forgotten burning hot strategies, accomplishments, and its unpredictable rise to the metagame stage. Also, we're going old school in this video, so I won't be covering the recent iteration, at least not yet, because this is part 1 of the overall story. Time to go full Zuko mode and restore some honor. This is how the Volcanic archetype rose to competitive prominence. Everyone remembers Volcanics being a fairly competitive deck during the Arc V era, but the archetype originates from GX. Premiering out of Force of the Breaker, which was released into TCG in mid-May 2007, Volcanics were given a lot of hype by Konami. Their boss monster was the cover card of this very set. Austin, their corresponding anime character, had a large role in Season 3. In fact, in a shocking turn of events, he was actually the duelist who took down the infamous Supreme King. Despite the hype and spotlight, Volcanics were not an immediate competitive success. Individually, the archetype had some very powerful cards, especially in terms of monster effects. Volcanic Rocket was a great opener as it had incredibly high attack for a level 4 monster and was a +1 on summon. It didn't have the greatest pool of cards to work with, however it did allow Volcanics to set up a pretty devastating disruptive play that was on par with the best in the game at the time. The second Volcanic powerhouse was definitely Volcanic Shell. While in no way a physically intimidating presence, Shell was excellent in terms of utility. With Volcanic Shell's ability to add another copy of itself to your hand while in the graveyard for the cost of 500 life points, you were in many cases able to have a poor man's Sinister Serpent, which of course was long banned by that time. Those two monsters along with Wildfire appeared to be the most promising cards in the archetype, but in no way was a pure Volcanic deck feasible, at least not on the Shonen Jump level. Hell, if I'm being completely honest, I don't even think it would have worked well on the regional circuit either. For starters, while the archetype did have a lot of explosive monster removal in the way of Wildfire and Scattershot, both cards relied heavily on Blaze Accelerator, which coincidentally acts your battle phase the turn you activated its effect. It should go without saying, but that drawback was highly counterproductive, and by design, Volcanics were rarely able to capitalize off their own monster nukes. The archetype simply had no good inherent ways of applying pressure to the opponent after getting rid of their monsters, which I still find pretty ironic. To make matters even worse, the high-end cards in the Volcanic archetype didn't fix this issue. In fact, they actually exacerbated it. Tri-Blaze Accelerator couldn't even be activated without first specifically sacrificing the original Blaze Accelerator, meaning at minimum a quick -1 and card advantage. Its removal effect was easier to work with, sure, but it shared the same crippling drawback as the original, thus making it not worth playing. The deck's boss monster was arguably just as terrible. Just like Tri-Blaze, Doomfire required a specific sacrifice to be played at all. Volcanic Doomfire attempted to make up for this with great offensive stats and a Regeki effect that triggered when you killed an opponent's monster in battle. However, the glaring problem with that effect was, as stated earlier, anytime you used your accelerators, your battle phase was gone for that turn, so Doomfire's best effect was stupidly hindered by the deck's own core strategy. All these obvious and glaring flaws turned most competitive duelists off completely, and the deck was initially relegated to for fun players or fans of Austin in the anime. However, one bold duelist saw great potential in Volcanics as an excellent disruptive engine that could be combined with a reliable and established archetype. Miguel Alberin probably isn't the name that rings a bell for a lot of players, but he was a very solid competitive duelist in the GX era. In fact, during 2007, he was one of the few things burning hotter than the Volcanic hybrid deck he would soon popularize. Miguel was no stranger to the top tables, as he finished top 8 at Shonen Jump St. Louis in February, piloting Airblade Turbo. He then snagged the top 16 spot during the next formats at Shonen Jump Detroit in July, playing pure Monarchs. Clearly he was someone fully capable of playing standardized meta decks, but at Shonen Jump Chicago, held in late September 2007, Miguel was ready to bring out all the spice. Shonen Jump Chicago was to be the second Shonen Jump of the September 2007 format. Although the top 16 of Shonen Jump DC just 2 weeks prior was fairly wild, with decks like Demizo TK and Gadget sneaking in and holding on for dear life, it was pretty clear we had a big 3 brewing in the tier 1. Comic Odyssey, or CO Burn, Zombies, and Perfect Circle Monarchs all made top 4 at DC and stood above the other contenders as the meta elite. These decks were easily the 3 most consistent decks of the early formats and thus were the most played. With that said, other Monarch variants still saw a lot of high-level play and success during this time. At Shonen Jump Chicago, Miguel went full mad scientist and entered the event with a Volcanic hybrid deck almost no one understood but himself. At first glance, the deck actually looks really outdated and as if Miguel was completely disconnected from the current metagame. I say this mainly because of the inclusion of the Apprentice engine, which you could argue was a cornerstone of the build, as were the Volcanic cards. While the Apprentice engine had catapulted Monarchs to championships in years prior, the engine was seeing far less competitive play and success by the time that this event took place. Despite Magician of Faith's recent return off the ban list, the Apprentice engine was almost completely out of the metagame in favor of the much faster Destiny engine. Add that to the fact that it hadn't performed very well at Shonen Jump DC. The Apprentice engine was probably outdated, but it did provide Miguel with some incredible stability and excellent fodder for his Monarch summons. Apprentice Magician itself was also fairly strong in the zombie matchup, as that deck could go 0 to 60 faster than any other meta deck in that format, and it was an ideal card for blocking pushes of 3 or more monsters. Of course, it wouldn't be a Volcanic hybrid deck without the Volcanic side. Miguel's Volcanic engine consisted of 3 Shell, 3 Rocket, 2 copies of Wildfire, and finally, he tied everything together with the Lone Blaze Accelerator. This might seem like a small engine, but it was almost a quarter of his deck. Volcanic Rocket was obviously his play starter, which of course he would use to fetch Accelerator. If Miguel was going second, he could send Shell to pop an opponent's monster, then search another copy for free. While he wouldn't be able to capitalize with battle damage, ideally he would be winning the field presence and advantage war even if the opponent's monster floated. If Miguel was opening up the duel, the ideal setup would be pairing his Accelerator with a copy of Wildfire. This play gave him explosive removal during the opponent's turn that outshined even Torrential Tribute, which was limited to 1 at the time. This is because Wildfire could be used in the end phase, when your opponent least expected it and didn't require any interaction from them, so you were free to fire it off whenever you wanted. It also cleared face down monsters, meaning opponents trying to set up a defense wouldn't be safe. With Wildfire, you usually lose your Volcanic Rocket as well, so on the surface, it appeared that you might not win out on the exchange. However, the token producing effect of the card was way ahead of its time. This token was not only a decently sized 1000 attack, but more importantly had no restrictions. Thus it served as the perfect tribute fodder for a Monarch summon during your turn to get your offense going and put pressure on your opponent. Monarchs were also a natural fit with Volcanics because of the synergy the archetype had with Soul Exchange. We know that Soul Exchange was always used for easy tribute summons. Miguel ran 2 copies of the card as he realized it worked exceptionally well with Blaze Accelerator. Since both cards shared the same drawback, Miguel could stack them in the same turn and have plays where he completely decimated his opponent's monster presence, then followed up with pressure during his next turn. Volcanic Shell was all about utility in Miguel's deck and fueled his many forms of removal. Using it for Accelerator to pop monsters was the obvious play, but combining it with Snipe Hunter and Phoenix Wing Wind Blast gave the deck the ability to tackle back row and even Rise-a-lock the opponent. Volcanic Shell gave this deck the ability to use some of the game's best spot removal cards completely free, and it also helped load the graveyard up quickly for Pot of Avarice recycling, which was fairly consistent at this time as Pot of Avarice had just moved to semi-limited status. Shell also worked quite well with the Transmigration Prophecy. Prophecy had caught on at this time because of its ability to disrupt Book of Life, Zombie Master, and Premature Burial plays. However, in this deck, it could also be used to recycle your own shells just for more fodder. One thing that went under the radar at the time is how much Volcanics actually benefited from the September 2007 ban list. On this particular list, Konami went after gadgets really hard as they semi-limited all 3 pieces, as well as dealt a huge blow to monster removal with the limitation of Smashing Ground, Fissure, and Snipe Hunter. This led to monster removal being at an absolute premium during the formats, and surprise, that's what Volcanics specialized in. As mentioned earlier, cards like Wildfire and Blaze Accelerator weren't just good removal cards, but they also dealt with face down, so there really wasn't any hiding from these cards. Lastly, this was the same ban list that asked the best spot removal card in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Ring of Destruction. While 500 life points wasn't a lot to pay for Shell or Wildfire, it wasn't uncommon to sometimes pay 2,000 or more in a single duel. Pre-ring ban, life points mattered, and it would have been a lot easier to lose to a direct attack followed by a well-timed ring. With that card gone, losses like this would be far less likely. Miguel entered Chicago and started the tournament off red hot. He opened the event on a 5-game winning streak, which saw him sitting right at table number 1. At this point, he started to gain the attention of the other duelists at the event. This led to him receiving a deck profile by head writer Jason Gerbemeyer, as well as 2 feature matches. In round 7, Miguel dueled circles around his opponent Matt Hoey. In the first game, it took him about 5 turns to draw Volcanic Shell, but Miguel decided to play the duel at a slow and methodical pace and wouldn't overextend. He held his Transmigration Prophecy and used it at the absolute perfect time, chaining it to his opponent's Call of the Haunted, which targeted Card Trooper. Once he finally hit Shell off of Crystal Seer, he had the gas needed for all of his discard cards as he continually spun Hoey out of the game with Wing Blast. Game 2 wasn't nearly as close. Miguel jumped on Hoey from the start with a turn 1 Rocket Summon and then set his Accelerator face down as bait. Hoey predictably took the bait, popping it with Dust Tornado and attempted to mount Miguel with a Cyber Dragon. Miguel responded by summoning a second rocket during his turn, adding that same accelerator back to his hand, then popping the dragon with Shell. Miguel had clearly outfoxed Hoey and would win the duel a few turns later. This dominant win showed the Yu-Gi-Oh! World what Volcanics were capable of, especially considering Shell, Rocket, and Accelerator were the driving forces in the duel. 2 rounds later, Miguel would have a much more competitive feature match in which he fell in a close game versus Daryl Gessler's anti-meta gadget deck, but luckily he still made the top cut. As you might expect, Miguel was the only duelist in the top 16 playing anything that remotely resembled Volcanics. This was a good thing as it continued to give him the edge when people were unfamiliar with the Volcanic cards themselves. Matt Hoey even admitted in their feature match that he had no idea what Wildfire even did, so that was something. Miguel won his top 16 duel and moved on to the quarterfinals where, in my opinion, bad luck met him head on. Miguel was paired against Louis Raimondo and the dreaded CO Burn. This was easily his worst matchup as Volcanic specialized in monster removal and Burn didn't care about losing its monsters. In this matchup, Miguel would also be heavily punished for paying life points for Shell, as that just played into the hands of Wave Motion Cannon even harder. Lastly, skipping a battle phase against Burn was like digging your own grave, as every turn was a fight against their stall cards, and stalling yourself obviously wasn't going to help. Miguel loaded up on lots of spell and trap removal with his side deck, but to no avail as he fell against Louis in those quarterfinals. You could say that there was some solace as Louis would go on to win the entire event. Personally, I'd say running into your worst possible matchup and the eventual champion in the top 8 was definitely a rough break. Regardless, with his performance, Miguel gave birth to a strong contender. Volcanics had now achieved an amazing feat, but 2 Shonen jumps after Chicago, it would prove that it wasn't a one-hit wonder. On the first weekend of December, Shonen Jump San Mateo would take place, and Charlie La would take up the mantle for the Volcanic cause. He entered with a deck clearly inspired by Miguel Albaran. It wasn't an exact carbon copy as he changed some of the ratios. His most notable change to the deck was the addition of Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, presumably to stop his opponent's Mizuki and malicious effects. I guess you could also say that he just wanted to disrupt their graveyards. It was an interesting change, although if I'm being completely honest, I really think he just made Miguel's deck worse with every change that he made, especially with his decision to side into more Volcanic cards, which I still don't completely understand to this day. Regardless of my thoughts, Charlie's results were impressive. At one point during the later rounds, he was the top player in Swiss, and this carried him to the Day 2 top 16 cut. Unfortunately in Day 2, as bad luck had befallen Miguel at Chicago, so had it also for Charlie. he was paired against the dreaded CO Burn matchup in the top 16, which he miraculously won somehow. Sadly, after that shocking win, fate seemingly got more cruel as his next opponent was the Shonen Jump champion, Philly Luna. Luna was the clear favorite in this match, and the duel played out as such. Philly made multiple key bluffs to get Charlie to continually waste his shells on low to no value plays. Philly rised Charlie 3 times in game 1, then hit him with the devastating Shonen Jump prize card, Crush Card Virus in game 2. Philly would go on to win San Mateo, and for the second time, our Volcanic duelist would fall at the hands of the red-hot eventual champion in the quarterfinals. After these 2 excellent finishes, the Volcanic Monarch hybrid deck would accrue some regional top 8 finishes, but it never again reached that high-level success moving forward. While the deck was still very solid, the timing was just honestly pretty poor, mainly because there was just one more Shonen Jump championship after San Mateo before the format-destroying Phantom Darkness was released for Shonen Jump Houston. I'll be blunt here, there was no way in hell Volcanics were going to keep up with that return. The Apprentice engine was far too slow for that, and to put the nail in the coffin, Konami actually ended up re-banning Magician of Faith after that one format anyways. The hit was completely unnecessary as the Apprentice engine wasn't going to be good moving forward anyways, but they also limited Rise of the Storm Monarch, which was a very big part of this deck, so it was really a combination of indirect banlist hits and the format just becoming way too fast for the deck overall. Anyways, we are now at the conclusion of our Yu-Gi-Oh story. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, or more importantly, you learned something. If you did, give the video a thumbs up and watch out for more videos like this one in the future.
You may have dodged that bullet, son, but you can't pull the same tactic twice, so brace yourself.